The day I was thrown into the pond, the entire town came to witness the spectacle. They said that Lady Pei, the imperial scholar's wife, was unfaithful to her husband, having an affair with another man, and was caught in the act. My husband, that gentle and refined man who had promised me forever and always, the man who vowed to be mine for life, was the one who pushed me into the cold pigsty. There was not a trace of compassion in his eyes, only anger and disgust at his tarnished reputation. Shun Qingning, the Pei family has treated you kindly, yet you have committed such disgraceful acts, tarnishing our family name. Today, I shall cleanse the household of this shame. I struggled desperately, wanting to tell him I was framed, but the rag stuffed in my mouth only let out muffled sobs. Cold river water engulfed my mouth and nose, and in my final moment of consciousness, I saw my 5-year-old son Pei Yuan being forcefully pinned to the ground. In his clear eyes, I saw my own reflection sinking, filled with boundless hatred. When I opened my eyes again, I had become a lone soul drifting above the Pei estate. I saw Pei Wenshuan tie my son to the locust tree in the courtyard like a dog and whip him mercilessly with a riding crop. Damn brat, your shameless mother is dead, and you don't deserve to live. The tender back was crisscrossed with blooded whips, but my Yuana made not a sound. He only stared fixedly at his father with those eyes, not like a child's, but like a lone wolf lying in wait in the shadows. I am dead, died in the 6th year of marrying into the Pei family, died on a bone-chilling early winter morning. My soul floats lightly, bound by an invisible force to the Pei family estate, unable to go anywhere. I can only watch helplessly as all this unfolds, like an absurd and sorrowful play. I saw my mother-in-law, that old lady who usually praised me for being virtuous and sensible, now directing the servants to meticulously inventory all my valuable dowry items and store them away. Her face wore an unmistakable smile of greed. This white jade guanine is a fine artifact from the previous dynasty. Keep it safe. And these pair of plume hairpins, just right for Rumei to wear. The Rumei mentioned in her words was my distant cousin, Liu Rumei. At this moment, she was dressed in a simple white robe, nestling in her husband Pei Wenshuan's arms as she softly comforted him. Cousin, please don't be too heartbroken. Sister-in-law, she was just momentarily foolish. You still have me. And Yuana. Pei Wenshuan held her close, his face filled with grief, but his voice was as cold as ice. Don't mention that bastard. My heart, or rather my remaining consciousness, throbbed painfully within me. Bastard, that was his own son. I drifted into the courtyard and saw my Yuana, my 5-year-old child, tied to the old locust tree with a rough hemp rope. The cold winter wind in early winter cut like a knife across his thin body, his small face frozen purple, his lips cracked and bleeding from dryness. The servants who passed by avoided him as if he were a plague, circling around him and occasionally throwing him looks of contempt and disgust. It's him, the bastard son of that whore, such a young age, and he looks like he's not a good kid, just like his mother. The master said, he's not allowed any food, let him reflect well. My Yuana, my precious son whom I feared would bump his head or drop him, always treating him like he'd melt in my mouth and break if I held him too tightly. He had now become the most despised person in the entire estate. He didn't cry, nor did he make a fuss. He stood there quietly, his small body straight as a rod, like a stubborn little pine tree. He looked at the man and woman embracing in the main hall, at the servants pointing and whispering about him. In those eyes, which should have been innocent and carefree, burned a flame unsuitable for his age. It is hatred. I never thought this word would appear on my 5-year-old son. I desperately wanted to rush over and embrace him, wanting to use my ethereal body to shield him from even a hint of cold wind. But I kept passing through his body, accomplishing nothing. I could only helplessly and desperately watch. Night fell, and the Pei residence was brightly lit with lights, filled with laughter and joy. Liu Rumei personally went to the kitchen to prepare a table full of dishes that Pei Wenxuan loved most. Lady Pei grabbed her hand affectionately and called her my good daughter-in-law. No one remembered the child who had been tied up in the courtyard and had gone without a drop of water for a day and a night. No one remembered me, the unvirtuous first wife, who had just been thrown by their own hands into the cold river. In the middle of the night, a drizzling winter rain began to fall. The rain soaked Yuana's hair and clothes, and he shivered with cold. Finally unable to endure it any longer, his small body slowly collapsed. I screamed in anguish, but my voice dispersed into the wind and rain. Just when I thought my child was about to die in the indifference of his own father, a thin figure, holding an oil paper umbrella, sneaked over and ran to the locust tree. She was the mute servant woman who was in charge of cleaning and sweeping. She was my attendant who came with my dowry, and also the only person in the Pei household who still had a bit of kindness for me. She untied the ropes bound to Yuana's body, held his small frame in her arms, took off her own coat which was still relatively dry, and wrapped him tightly in it. Then, she pulled out a hard, warm bun still bearing her body temperature from her bosom and stuffed it into Yuana's hands. Yuana seemed to have frozen stiff. He stared blankly at the mute old woman without moving. The mute old woman anxiously RD and gestured, signaling him to eat quickly. After a long time, Yuana slowly raised his hand, nibbling slowly at the cold steamed bun that could knock out his teeth. He ate very slowly and very seriously, as if he were eating some delicacy from the mountains or seas. 2 lines of clear tears slid down his dirty cheeks, mixing into the bits of steamed bun in his mouth. That was a bitter and astringent taste. I looked at him, my heart torn asunder. My soul and spirit were thus trapped in this small space, beginning a prolonged agony that would last for 10 long years. 2. On the 7th day after my death, it was my head, first mourning period. Normally, the family should have set up a spirit hall and burned paper money for me, but the Pei family estate was decorated with lanterns and banners, filled with joy and celebration, because today, Pei Wenxuan is formally marrying Liu Rumei as his wife. He couldn't even wait until the 3-month mourning period was over, and directly took Liu Rumei as his official wife under the pretext of inviting good fortune. How ridiculous! My legitimate wife's bones are still warm, and is already eager to hold a good fortune celebration for my death. The wedding wasn't held in grand style, but all the proper etiquette was observed. Pei Wenxuan wore a bright red wedding robe, which made his hypocritical face even more handsome. Liu Rumei wore a phoenix crown and rosy bridal dress, her smile as bright as a flower. They bowed to the elders in the main hall, receiving blessings from everyone present, and my son Pei Yuan was locked in the woodshed. I drifted into that dark and damp woodshed and saw him curled up in a pile of straw in the corner. Still wearing that thin old garment, he seemed to have a high fever, his little face burning red, muttering something continuously in his mouth. I leaned closer to listen. Mother, mother, one by one, again and again, like a dull knife, repeatedly slicing through my already shattered heart. Yuana, mother is here. Mother is right here. I futilely reached out my hand to touch his forehead, but my hands could only bring about a void of coldness. Outside came the noise of guests and joyous sounds, forming a stark contrast with the deathly silence of this woodshed. Suddenly, the door of the woodshed was kicked open. A drunk, accompanied by 2 servants, walked in. Little bastard, the lady wants you to go over and serve tea. The butler hiccuped and looked down on him with disdain. Yuana seemed to be delirious from fever and didn't respond. The butler immediately flew into a rage and kicked Yuana with his foot. I'm talking to you, deaf. Yuana's small body tumbled to the side like a rag doll, and he let out a muffled groan of pain. Finally regaining some consciousness, he raised his head, those pitch-black eyes staring intently at the butler. The coldness in that gaze made the butler instinctively take a step back. but soon, he was overcome with anger and humiliation. "Hey, you little bastard, still dare to glare at me? You've gone too far," he called out to his servant. "Carry him to the main hall for me." Thus, my son, who was suffering from a high fever, was roughly dragged by two adults into the joyous main hall. Liu Rumei sat upon her high throne, watching as Pei Yuan was dragged in, her eyes flashing with a gleam of triumphant malice. She picked up a cup of tea and spoke softly to Pei Wenshuan. "Husband, it's time for Yuan to serve me tea. From now on, I will be his mother." Pei Wenshuan didn't even glance at Pei Yuan. He simply smiled gently at Liu Rumei. Just have you handle it." A servant forced the teacup into Pei Yuan's hands and pressed his head down, making him kneel. "Quick, serve tea to your new wife." Pei Yuan knelt on the ground, his body swaying as if about to collapse. He looked at the tea water swaying in his cup, then glanced up at the pair of beauties seated on the high throne. His father was looking at the woman by his side with eyes full of doting affection. That woman was wearing the phoenix crown and brocade robes that should have belonged to his mother, occupying the position that should have been his mother's. Suddenly, Pei Yuan smiled. It was an extremely sinister smile, appearing on the face of a 5-year-old child, sending chills down people's spines. He picked up the teacup, stood up unsteadily, and walked step by step toward Liu Rumei. Liu Rumei looked at him, wearing a fake smile of affection. "Good child, come here quickly." Pei Yuan walked up to her, and everyone assumed he was about to offer tea. The next second, he raised his hand and poured the entire cup of scalding hot tea directly onto Liu Rumei's beautiful face. "Ah!" Liu Rumei let out a piercing scream, clutched her face, and collapsed into Pei Wenshuan's arms. Everyone was stunned. Pei Wenshuan flew into a rage. He kicked Pei Yuan hard to the ground and roared, "You bastard! How dare you hurt your own mother?" Pei Yuan lay on the ground, coughing up blood. He raised his head, grinned, and shouted with all his might, word by word, "I have no mother. My mother is dead. You killed her. You are all murderers. You wicked woman. You're not fit to be my mother." The entire hall was deathly silent. All the guests looked at this family with frightened and complicated expressions. Pei Wenshuan's face turned pale and then red, as if he had been slapped countless times in public. He was so furious that he pointed at Pei Yuan and shouted at the servants, "Drag him away, lock him in the ancestral hall. No one is allowed to let him out without my command." My Yuana was dragged away like this. He didn't cry out anymore, but instead fixed everyone with those eyes that seemed to be poisoned, staring at them intently. I looked at Liu Rumei's red and swollen face from the perm, at Pei Wenshuan's furious yet humiliated expression, at the guests' murmurs around the hall. My heart felt no trace of satisfaction, only endless sorrow. My Yuana, he was only 5 years old, using the only way he could. He staged a revenge for me that was insignificant yet risked his own life, and as a mother, I could do nothing at all. 3. From that day on, Pei Yuan's life completely fell into hell. He was locked in the ancestral hall for 3 days and 3 nights, without food or drink. When he was released, he had lost so much weight that he was unrecognizable. His high fever had turned into a serious illness, and he coughed day and night, as if he were coughing out his heart and lungs. Liu Rumei claimed to have hired the best doctors to treat him, but in reality, she only let the incompetent physicians in the estate prescribe some bitter Huanglian decoction to force-feed him. The medicine was unbearably bitter, but my Yuana would drink it down expressionlessly every time. He knew that only by staying alive could there be hope. His illness lasted so long that he only recovered gradually, and his body was left with lasting health problems. Every winter, he would cough especially severely. Liu Rumei became the legitimate mistress of the Pei household, and she began to torment Pei Yuan in various ways. Skipping meals was a common occurrence, while other young masters and ladies enjoyed exquisite pastries and wore luxurious clothing. My Ioana was always given only a bowl of coarse rice and a set of faded old clothes that had been washed until they were white. The servants also followed suit, beating and abusing him recklessly. I had personally witnessed it. The house manager's son, a chubby boy who was even younger than Ioana, pointed at Ioana's nose and called him a bastard, then poured a bowl of dog food over his head. Ioana did not fight back, nor did he speak. He simply endured it silently, then washed his hair and face with cold river water, as if nothing had happened. I know that those humiliations, those pains, were like poisoned thorns, deeply piercing his young heart, taking root and sprouting, waiting for the day when they would grow into towering trees, repaying tenfold everything that had been inflicted upon him. He became increasingly silent and unremarkable. He was like a shadow in the mansion, always appearing silently and disappearing silently. Everyone was about to forget that the Pei family still had such a legitimate eldest son. Pei Wenshuan treated him as if he were invisible. In his eyes, Pei Yuan was the greatest stain in his life, a blemish on his glorious reputation as a top scholar. He hated seeing Pei Yuan, because that would remind him of me, his unfaithful wife. A few years later, Liu Rumei also gave birth to a son, named Pei Lang. Pei Lang's birth made Pei Yuan's situation increasingly difficult. Pei Wenshuan poured all his paternal love into this youngest son, spoiling him immensely and placing high hopes on him. As for Pei Yuan, he had become a complete outsider. At the age of 7, it was time for initial education, early schooling. Pei Wenshuan hired the best scholar in the city to Pei Lang. Ioana also wanted to go. He secretly hid outside the classroom window, listening to the scholar's lessons. After being discovered, Pei Wenshuan severely scolded him in front of everyone. "You, a bastard born of a sinner's daughter, what books do you dare read? Do you deserve to? Get back to your courtyard." I watched Ioana's small fists clenched tightly in his lap, his nails digging into his flesh. He didn't argue, only giving Pei Wenshuan a deep look before turning to leave. From that day forward, he never came near the schoolhouse again. I thought he had given up, until one night, I saw him sneaking into Pei Wenshuan's study. Pei Wenshuan's study was his most prideful place. Housing 10,000 volumes of books, he never allowed anyone to enter, especially Pei Yuan. I saw my Ioana, using the faint moonlight through the window, standing on his tiptoes to pull out a dusty copy of the 3-character classic from the bottom shelf of the bookcase. He held it close to his chest like a treasure, then silently slipped away. Back in his dilapidated little courtyard, he lit a dim oil lamp, hunching over that tiny flickering light. He painstakingly read each character one by one. When he encountered characters he didn't know, he would use charcoal to repeatedly trace them on the ground until he memorized them. It turned out that he had never given up. By day, he helped the servants in the mansion with tasks like chopping wood, carrying water, and sweeping the courtyard. In exchange for some meager leftover rice, he listened as the servant who could read would recite letters from home. Secretly memorizing a few characters at a time, he went to the kitchen to help the mute servant girl with the fire, and the mute servant girl would secretly teach him to write on the ground with the fire poker. Thus, he began his scholarly journey in the most clumsy and primitive way possible. Day after day, year after year, the books in the study were stolen one by him, and then placed back one by one. The charcoal marks on the ground were erased and rewritten and erased. His hands, covered with thick calluses and wounds from years of hard labor, his body, weakened by malnutrition, was thinner and shorter than his peers, but his eyes grew brighter and brighter, shining like stars in the night sky, filled with wisdom and resilience. I look at him and often wonder what my Ioana would be like if I were still here. He would sit in a bright and clean schoolroom, dressed in clean and neat clothes, studying under the best scholars. He would grow up carefree and become a scholar who is like his father, or even better than his father. Instead of being like this now, like a wild grass struggling to grow upward in a dark corner, desperately seeking nutrients, weedy grasses often possess the most tenacious vitality. Once they catch sight of sunlight, they will spread like prairie fires, covering the entire earth. 4. Time flies, and 10 years have passed. In the past 10 years, I have watched Pei Yuan grow from a 5-year-old child into a 15-year-old teenager. His height increased, and his facial features gradually matured. His eyebrows and eyes vaguely resembled both me and Pei Wenxuan, but he had a touch more sharpness and coldness than Pei Wenxuan. He was usually quiet and reserved, and the people in the mansion could hardly sense his presence. Seeing that he was well behaved and posed no real threat, Liu Rumei gradually relaxed her harassment toward him. Just occasionally think of him, would prick him with a few words, watching his face with no reaction, feeling bored, and then stop paying attention. Pei Wenxuan's career path was becoming increasingly smooth, with his reputation as a top scholar and the support of his wife Liu Rumei. He was appointed as a third-rank Minister of Personnel, making him a notable figure in the capital. The Pei family's prestige was rising day by day. Everyone was immersed in this glory. Except for me and my son. That year, at 15, Pei Yuan made a decision. He was going to leave the Pei family. That day, he knelt down in front of Pei Wenxuan for the first and last time. Proactively, "Father," he spoke, his voice hoarse, carrying the distinctive naivety of a young boy, yet calm with not a trace of emotion. "I am already 15 years old and refuse to continue living off my family's rice. I humbly request your permission to go out and make my own living." Pei Wenxuan was playing with his most beloved youngest son, Pei Lang. When he heard this, he didn't even bother to lift his eyelids. "Oh, where do you want to go? To enlist in the army?" Pei Wenxuan finally glanced at him with a proper look, his eyes filled with scrutiny and contempt. "Join the army? With your frail appearance, you probably can't even lift a sword. Going there would just be suicide." Pei Yuan remained kneeling straight, neither humble nor arrogant. "Life and death are determined by fate," Pei Wenxuan sneered. He naturally didn't believe that Pei Yuan had any ambitions of achieving greatness or establishing himself in the world. He only thought that Pei Yuan couldn't stand the life in the mansion and wanted to escape. It was better this way. As long as this stain wasn't hovering in front of his eyes, he could avoid seeing it and thus not be troubled in his heart. "Fine, if you want to go, then go, but there's one condition. Once you step out of this door, you are no longer part of the Pei family. Whether you live or die will have nothing to do with the Pei mansion. You must never again use my name, Pei Wenxuan, to deceive and cause trouble in public." He was severing all ties with Pei Yuan, cutting off their father-son relationship. "Son understands." Pei Yuan calmly edged 3 heads. Each one was loud and resolute. "Thank you, father, for the years of upbringing." The last 8 characters he almost squeezed out between his teeth. I watched his straight silhouette and slowly stood up, walking out of the main gate of the Pei residence without a trace of reluctance. My heart ached so much it felt like it would suffocate. I knew he wasn't really going to enlist in the army, he just needed an excuse, a legitimate reason to leave this prison. The day he left, only a thin figure was secretly wiping her eyes behind the door. It was the mute old woman, in Pei Yuan's bundle. She had stuffed a few boiled eggs and some silver coins she had saved up over half her life. Pei Yuan bowed deeply toward her. That was the only bit of warmth he had received in this cold mansion. The young boy's slender figure disappeared at the end of the long street. For the first time, my soul felt panic. I am bound within this mansion, unable to step outside. I do not know where my Yuana has gone, nor do I know how he will survive alone in the world. Will I never hear from him again? From this day forward, day and night, I drift before the main gate of the Pei residence, watching the direction he departed, my heart filled with anxiety and torment. For the next 3 years, I received no news about Pei Yuan. He was like a pebble dropped into the ocean, not stirring the slightest ripple. The people of the Pei family had long forgotten about him. Pei Wenshuan's career flourished, and he was promoted to Minister of Personnel. Liu Lang, the son of Liu Rumei, had also grown into a graceful young man, relying on his father's influence to hunt and play games in the capital city, becoming a dissolute young master of wealth. The entire Pei family was immersed in a false prosperity, until the spring 3 years later, the new imperial examination results were announced. For a moment, the entire capital was electrified. Because this year's top scholar was too legendary, his name was Pei Yuan, only 18 years old, yet he achieved the Triple Crown success, making him the youngest top scholar since the founding of the dynasty. What was even more legendary was that no one knew his family background. All that was known was that he had arrived in the capital alone 3 years ago, staying in a dilapidated temple in the southern part of the city. By day, he copied books for others. By night, he studied tirelessly. When the news reached the Pei residence, Pei Wenshuan was drinking and having fun with his colleagues. When he heard the name Pei Yuan, his wine cup clattered to the ground. 5. Tell me, what is the name of the newly crowned top scholar? Pei Wenshuan's voice was trembling, replying to the master, his name is Pei Yuan. With just the character Yuan as his given name, Pei Wenshuan's face turned instantly pale. He staggered out and snatched the imperial edict rubbing from the servant's hands. When he saw that familiar yet name sitting at the top of the list, his whole body froze. It's really him. It's really that son who was kicked out of the house by him, who was considered his lifetime shame. The entire Pei mansion was in an uproar. Liu Rumei couldn't believe what she was seeing, in her handkerchief in disbelief. How is this possible? That little brat, how could he become a Zhuangyuan? Lady Pei was so excited that she stood up from her chair. Zhuangyuan. Our Pei family has produced another Zhuangyuan. Quick, send people to fetch him back. This is a great fortune that brings glory to our ancestors. They forgot how they had originally driven Pei Yuan out of the house, and forgot that famous line, whether he lives or dies. It has nothing to do with the Pei family. Now, Pei Yuan was the dazzling new Zhuangyuan, the Chilean's son who could bring supreme honor to the Pei family. They naturally believed that Pei Yuan should come back, should acknowledge his ancestral roots. Pei Wenshuan personally led people with generous gifts, proceeding in grand procession to the dilapidated temple where Pei Yuan was staying. I waited anxiously, hoping that Pei Wenshuan would find him, yet not wanting him to be found. My emotions reached their peak of complexity. I feared that my Yuana might forget the years of blood-soaked grudges because of this sudden honor. I'm afraid he might soften his heart because of Pei Wenshuan's few lines of fake father-son affection. When Pei Wenshuan arrived at the dilapidated temple, it was already empty. Only a piece of paper was left on the old table. There were only 8 characters on it, the brushstrokes sharp and powerful. Penetrating through the paper, the day of severance, our bonds of kindness and righteousness are cut. Pei Wenshuan stared at the note, his whole body trembling with rage. Rebellious, truly rebellious. He doesn't recognize me as his father anymore. I gave birth to him and raised him, and now that he has achieved success and fame, he wants to cast off the Pei family. It's absolutely heartless and despicable. He ranted in fury within the dilapidated temple. Completely forgetting how he had spoken in the past, I looked at his hypocritical face and felt utterly disgusted. Unable to find Pei Yuan, Pei Wenshuan had no choice but to return dejectedly. He used his power as Minister of Personnel to try to sabotage Pei Yuan's career, but he soon discovered that he had no way to begin, because Pei Yuan's responses during the palace examination deeply pleased the emperor's heart. The emperor praised him endlessly, immediately appointing him as a 6th-rank compiler at the Hanlin Academy and personally designating him as the crown prince's tutor. What kind of favor this was! Everyone knew that this young top scholar had an unlimited future. Countless noble families wanted to marry their daughters to him, trying to win over this new rising star in the imperial court, but Pei Yuan refused them all. He didn't even move into the mansion granted to him by the emperor as a reward for his top scholar title, but instead found a quiet little courtyard to live in. Besides attending court, he stayed secluded, avoiding any social connections with anyone. He was like a lone star, cold, bright, and carrying an aura of aloofness that kept people at arm's length. The Pei family sent people to his door several times, trying to persuade him to acknowledge his ancestral roots, but each attempt was rejected. The last time, Pei Wenshuan himself came in person, waiting outside for 3 hours. Yet he was not even allowed to see Pei Yuan's face. The butler only brought out one sentence: "Minister Pei, my master has said that those who do not share the same path should not plot together." He has no relationship with the Pei family anymore. This time, the entire capital city knew. The newly crowned top scholar Pei Yuan and the Minister of Personnel Pei Wenshuan, father and son, had fallen out at once. Rumors spread in all directions. Some say Pei Yuan is heartless and faithless. Once he achieved success and fame, he no longer recognized his biological father. Others say there must be some hidden circumstances behind this. Pei Wenshuan, in order to salvage his own reputation, began to speak about his difficulties in various settings, both openly and indirectly. He said how he had raised his son with great hardship and suffering, and how his son was rebellious, running away from home over minor issues, and still harboring resentment toward him to this day. He spoke about me, that unfaithful wife, and how she had dealt a tremendous blow to his life. He portrayed himself as a pitiable father who had been betrayed by his wife and abandoned by his son. Suddenly, public opinion began to turn in his favor. Even in the imperial court, censors impeached Pei Yuan for lack of filial piety, claiming that his character was flawed and that he was unworthy of holding office. I watched all this unfold, feeling as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. My Yuana, he explained nothing. He simply bore all the blame and criticism in silence. I saw him sitting alone in his study, facing the moonlight through the window, for a whole night. His silhouette was so lonely it broke my heart. Just when I thought he was about to be crushed by all these rumors and gossip, things took a turn for the better. Someone unexpected stood up. 6. The person who stepped forward was the dumb old woman. Since Pei Yuan had left, Liu Rumei had found an excuse to drive the dumb old woman out of the Pei residence for these few years. She had been living outside the city walls, begging for her livelihood. When she heard that Pei Yuan had passed the highest imperial examination and was being criticized for filial impiety, this old woman who had never read a book in her life and could not even speak a word made a shocking decision. She was going to the drum of public complaints. The drum of public complaints was set up outside the Wu Gate, and it could only be struck by those with extraordinary grievances or great injustices. A ragged old beggar woman going to the drum of public complaints was itself a matter of enormous news. The moment the drumbeats rang out, the entire capital city trembled. The Jingzhou Yin personally presided over this case. In the great hall, the mute wet nurse knelt on the ground, trembling all over. Yet her eyes were resolute. She could not speak. But she produced a petition. The petition was not written by her. She begged a fallen scholar to write it down word by word according to her gestures. On the statement paper, it was clearly written about all the inhumane abuse that Pei Yuan had suffered in the Pei family over the past 10 years, chained in the courtyard, nearly frozen to death and starved, fever high and persistent, yet no one cared, treated like a servant, brutally beaten and abused at will, starved by her stepmother and dressed in rags, abandoned by her biological father who called her a bastard, deprived of the right to education. Every single incident is shocking to behold. At the end of the petition, There was also a special testimony attached. That was a series of drawings made by the dumb old woman using a firewood stick on the ground. In the drawing was a thin little boy with dog food poured over his head by a fat boy. In the drawing was a little boy secretly hiding outside a window on a cold winter night, listening to the reading sounds from inside. In the drawing was a little boy writing characters repeatedly on the ground with charcoal under the dim light of an oil lamp. The artistic style is, yet it is full of impact. The entire main hall was deathly silent. Everyone was so shocked by this silent accusation that they couldn't utter a word. The Jingzhou prefect summoned Pei Wenshuan to appear in court. When Pei Wenshuan saw that complaint document and those paintings, his face turned as white as a sheet of paper. He firmly denied the allegations. Absurdity. This is nothing but a slanderous accusation from a scheming servant. I, Pei Wenshuan, am a court official who has studied the teachings of sages and worthies. How could I possibly commit such despicable acts unworthy of beasts? Then why won't the top scholar acknowledge you? The Jingzhou Yin asked. He was deceived by villains and bears a grudge against me, just as Pei Wenshuan was desperately making excuses. A cold voice rang out from outside the main hall. Whether it's slander or not will be known upon inspection. The crowd turned their heads and saw a young official in crimson official robes walking in slowly. He stood tall and straight, his face as handsome as a jade crown, yet his eyes were as cold as frost. It was none other than the newly crowned top scholar, Pei Yuan. Everyone knelt down to pay their respects, but Pei Wenshuan's body couldn't help but tremble uncontrollably. Pei Yuan walked to the center of the main hall, bowed to the Jingzhou prefect, and then, in front of everyone, slowly undid his official robes, revealing his inner undergarments. He turned around and displayed his back to everyone present. SSS. A sound of people drawing in their breath echoed throughout the hall. Only a narrow back was covered with scars. There were whip marks, burns, and wounds from clubs, new injuries covering old ones, layer upon layer, leaving almost no intact skin. These sinister scars silently told the story of the young top scholar's extremely painful past. Pei Yuan's voice, calm and composed, struck like a heavy hammer on everyone's hearts. When I was 5 years old, my father whipped me with a horsewhip and said I was a shameless child born from my mother, who had no dignity. When I was 7 years old, I fell through the ice on a winter day. My stepmother said I was disobedient and punished me by making me kneel in the snow all night, nearly causing permanent damage to my legs. When I was 10 years old, I was framed by my stepmother's son for stealing her hairpins. My father ordered me to be beaten 30 times and I had to lie in bed for a month. In this decade, what I've eaten are the spoiled leftovers that servants discarded. What I've worn are the old clothes from the mansion that the servants didn't want anymore. I never attended a single day of school. All the characters I know were stolen through Minister Pei. He turned around, staring directly into the pale-faced Pei Wenshuan, who had already lost all color in his face. His eyes filled with unmeltable frost. Do you still think this is defamation? Pei Wenshuan's lips trembled, but he couldn't utter a single word. The truth was revealed. The entire capital city was in an uproar. The more sympathy they had felt for Pei Wenshuan before, the more they now despised him. Hypocrisy, child abuse, beast-like behavior. All sorts of hateful accusations were hurled at his head. The impeachment memorials from the censorate flew toward the dragon throne like snowflakes. The emperor was furious and ordered a thorough investigation. Ultimately, Pei Wenshuan was stripped of his position as Minister of Personnel and demoted to the rank of Imperial Academy's chief examiner, where he was instructed to close the door and reflect on his mistakes. For someone with high aspirations and pride who regarded reputation as life itself, this was more unbearable than death. As for Pei Yuan, he was not only unaffected but actually gained more sympathy and respect from people due to his ordeal and resilience. The emperor was even particularly fond of him. believing that he was a talented individual with a resilient character. This incident ended with Pei Yuan's complete victory. He had the mute servant woman brought to his own residence and supported in his old age. I looked at my beloved Yuana, who had finally cleared my name and reclaimed some justice, and my heart was filled with countless emotions. I know, this is just the beginning. He endured for 10 years, planning for 3. What he wants is certainly not as simple as ruining Pei Wenshuan's reputation. What he wants is to make everyone who has ever hurt him, everyone who has ever hurt me, pay the most painful price. A larger storm is brewing. 7. After Pei Wenshuan was demoted, the Pei family's fortunes plummeted dramatically. The Ministry of Ceremonies residence, which used to be bustling with visitors, is now as quiet as a desert. How prosperous she had been in the circle of noble ladies before, how miserable she was now. Wherever she went, people pointed and whispered behind her back. She blamed everything on Pei Yuan. It's all that little brat's fault, that jinx, I should have suffocated him when he was born. She ranted and raved hysterically at home. Pei Wenshuan also spent his days drowning his sorrows in alcohol, beating Liu Rumei and Pei Lang when he was drunk. The entire Pei residence was shrouded in a gloom and despair. They had also considered going to seek out Pei Yuan, either to beg for mercy or to threaten him, but at Pei Yuan's residence, they couldn't even get through the gate, and my Yuana, on the imperial court floor, took one step at a time, walking exceptionally steadily, though young. He was shrewd in handling affairs and meticulous in his thinking. Whether dealing with state affairs or maneuvering with his colleagues, he did so with ease. He rarely spoke, but every word he said hit the mark. He never took sides or formed factions, yet no party dared to underestimate him. The emperor trusted him more and more, and the crown prince relied on him increasingly. In just 5 short years, he rose from being a 6th-grade scholar at the Hanlin Academy to becoming a 3rd-grade official as the Minister of Justice, the Office of Justice, responsible for overseeing criminal cases throughout the empire. When he took that position, I knew his blade of revenge was finally about to be drawn. Over the past 5 years, he had never stopped investigating my case from back then. I could see that he had used his authority at the Office of Justice to secretly access all the original case files. He found the county magistrate who had been in charge of handling my case back then, but that magistrate had accidentally drowned to death a year earlier. He also found the peddler who had slandered me for having an affair with him, but that peddler's entire family had been completely burned to death in a fire several years ago. All the leads had been cut off. I watched him sit in the study, staring at those yellowed case files, for an entire night. His brows were knitted together, his eyes heavy with unrelenting gravity. I was turning in circles with anxiety. I knew the truth. I knew who had orchestrated everything behind the scenes. It was Liu Rumei. She had bribed that peddler to forge the letter, and then drugged my sedative tea to create the false impression of me having an affair. The maid who used to serve the soup back then, I remember her face. Her name was Xiao Kui. Not long after the incident, Liu Rumei found an excuse to send her back to her hometown. Her hometown was just 30 li outside the city, in Lijia village. I was desperately trying to tell him, trying to shout it in his ear, but he could hear nothing. I could only watch helplessly as he repeatedly fell into stalemate. This sense of powerlessness was driving me nearly insane. Just when he was at his wit's end, an unexpected person came along and brought him a turning point. It was his younger brother, Pei Lang. Pei Lang had been spoiled senseless by Pei Wenshuan and Liu Rumei over the years, mastering every vice from eating, drinking, and gambling to prostitution. He had accumulated a huge gambling debt outside and was being hunted by creditors with nowhere to turn. He went home to ask Liu Rumei for money. Liu Rumei had been short on cash these past few years since Pei Wenshuan had been demoted and couldn't come up with such a large sum. Desperate for help, Pei Lang thought of his lofty imperial scholar older brother. He secretly went to the Dali temple to try to get money from Pei Yuan. Pei Yuan naturally refused to see him. Pei Lang was turned away at the door, furious and humiliated, and began cursing loudly outside. Pei Yuan, you ungrateful scoundrel, don't you forget that if it weren't for my mother, you'd never have made it this far. That whore of a mother of yours should have died years ago. He cursed without restraint, but inadvertently spoke a key sentence. You really think your mother was innocent? Let me tell you, it was all my mother's doing. That peddler, that letter, everything was arranged by my mother. Ha ha ha, your fool of a father actually believed it and drowned your mother himself. Karma, this is all karma. He thought this was just idle talk. But he didn't know that every word he said was clearly heard by Pei Yuan's trusted subordinate hiding in the shadows. When the subordinate recounted these words to Pei Yuan, I saw for the first time a crack appear on Pei Yuan's face, which had remained unchanged like an ice mountain for years. His wolf hairbrush in hand was snapped in half by his own grip. The ink droplets fell onto the rice paper, like a thick drop of blood. His eyes were churning with overwhelming anger and killing intent, as if he wanted to burn the entire world to the ground. After waiting for so many years, investigating for so many years, the truth he had been desperately pursuing was suddenly presented before him in such an absurd manner. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, all emotions in his eyes had vanished, leaving only a deathly cold stillness. He spoke slowly, his voice not loud but carrying an undeniable command. Go, invite Pei Lang to come see me. A net of revenge was finally about to tighten. 8. Pei Lang was invited into the secret chamber of the Dali temple. When he saw Pei Yuan, who was sitting in the highest seat with an icy expression, all his arrogant demeanor instantly disappeared without a trace. Brother, elder brother, he stammered out, I'm not your big brother. Pei Yuan's voice was cold as ice. My mother only has one son, me. Pei Lang was so frightened that his legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees on the ground. Big brother, I was wrong. I was just talking nonsense earlier. Don't take it seriously. Pei Yuan ignored his pleading and simply asked indifferently, repeat what you just said at the entrance. What did I say? I don't remember. Pei Lang's eyes avoided his, not daring to look at him. Pei Yuan sneered. He waved his hand, and two expressionless guards came forward, placing the red-hot branding iron in front of Pei Lang. I have many ways to make you remember. Pei Lang had been pampered since childhood and had never seen such a scene before. He was immediately terrified out of his wits, crying and shouting everything he knew. He recounted every detail of how Liu Rumei had plotted to frame him, how she had bribed the peddler, how she had forged evidence, and how she had drugged his soup. He even actively confessed a more important clue in order to save his life. That maid Xiao Kui who helped my mother back then. I know where she is. My mother was afraid she would leak the secret, so she didn't let her return to her hometown, but instead sold her to the brothel in the west of the city. She should still be there, having obtained the desired clue. Pei Yuan's eyes flashed with a cold gleam. He no longer harassed Pei Lang, but had him sent back to the Pei residence. Of course, he wasn't going to let him off so easily. When he was sent back, he had dozens of whip marks on his body. Though not fatal, they were enough to keep him in bed for months. This was just interest. The real reckoning was still to come. Pei Yuan immediately sent people to rush to the brothel in the west of the city overnight. When they found Xiao Kui, she was no longer the graceful maid she used to be. Years of torment had already made her emaciated and ghostly, neither human nor ghost. When she was brought before Pei Yuan and learned his identity, her entire being collapsed. She knelt on the ground, sobbing bitterly, revealing all the crimes that Liu Rumei had committed. How she had coerced and bribed her into putting poison in her tranquilizing soup, and how she had abandoned her after the deed was done, selling her into a brothel. Sir, I am not human. I am sorry, lady, but I was forced to. Liu Rumei threatened my entire family's lives, and I had no choice but to comply. Please show mercy and avenge lady's death. Both witness testimony and physical evidence, Pei Lang's confession, were present. The timing was right. The next morning, Pei Yuan submitted a memorial to the imperial court. He requested a retrial of the case involving the wife of former top scholar Pei Wenshuan, who was accused of adultery 10 years ago. The emperor, upon reading the shocking accusations on the memorial, was furious. How could such a heinous crime, trampling on human life and framing loyal ministers, my father was once a general who protected the kingdom, occur right under the emperor's nose? The emperor immediately issued an edict, ordering the 3 departments to jointly try this case, led by Pei Yuan, the Minister of Justice, with the Ministry of Justice and the Censorate assisting in the trial. As soon as the imperial decree was issued, the entire capital city once again erupted in chaos. No one had expected that after 13 years, this cold case would be reopened. No one could have expected that the judge assigned to this case would turn out to be the biological son of the parties involved. The Pei residence was. When Liu Rumei heard the news, she fainted on the spot. Pei Wenshuan was also ashen-faced, collapsing into his chair as he kept muttering, "It's over, everything is over." He is not a fool. He knows that Pei Yuan has been bearing with this for so many years, and now dares to bring this matter before the emperor. Must necessarily have sufficient evidence. He knows even better how terrifying his son is. He will leave them no room to survive. 9. On the day of the joint trial by the 3 ministries, the halls of the Dali temple were packed so tightly that not even water could seep through. Pei Wenshuan, Liu Rumei, and Lady Pei, as suspects, were brought up to the courtroom, dressed in prison garb and shackled. They had long since lost all the dignity they once possessed. Pei Yuan sat upright on the bench of judgment, his official robes exuding an atmosphere of severity, enhancing his sharp and emotionless face. He looked down at the 3 people kneeling before the hall, his biological father, his stepmother, and his grandmother, but in his eyes, they were merely criminals. Summon the court. The wooden clapper struck down, and the entire court fell into instant silence. Bring in the witness. Pei Yuan's voice echoed clearly in everyone's ears. The first one brought in was Xiao Kui, who had been tortured into an unrecognizable mess. When Liu Rumei saw her, her pupils suddenly contracted, and all the blood drained from her face. Xiao Kui cried out and recounted all the crimes of that year. Liu Rumei screamed frantically, "You're lying, you bitch! It was you who wasn't clean with your hands, stole things from the estate, and that's why I sold you. This is you taking revenge out of personal grudge, whether it is revenge or not. This official shall make a fair judgment." Pei Yuan's face showed no expression. Bring in the next one. The second person brought in was the family of that peddler who had slandered me about having an affair with him. It turned out that the Great Fire years ago had not killed everyone. The peddler's younger brother had escaped the disaster, and for these years had been living under a false identity, constantly on the run. He was found with great difficulty by Pei Yuan's people. He knelt on the ground, trembling as he revealed the truth. Back then, the Pei family's steward found my brother, gave him a large sum of money, and asked him to slander the lady's reputation. My brother, momentarily possessed by evil, agreed, but after the deed was done, they feared the truth would be revealed, so they set fire to our entire family. I personally saw the person who started the fire. It was the Pei family's steward. As soon as he finished speaking, the Pei family's old steward was brought in from outside, escorted by people. The old steward, upon seeing this scene, immediately wet himself in fear. Before any torture was even administered, he confessed to everything. It was he who acted on Liu Rumei's instructions to bribe the peddler, and he was also the one who personally lit the fire that wiped out the entire family. With the evidence so conclusive, Liu Rumei could not defend herself at all. She collapsed on the ground, limp as a pile of mud. Everyone's gaze was fixed on Pei Wenshuan. Minister of Justice opened his mouth and asked, "Pei Wenshuan, the case of your wife Shen from back then was full of doubts. As her husband, why didn't you conduct a thorough investigation before hastily drowning her? As a scholar and pillar of the nation, you were so heartless and ruthless, treating human lives as worthless grass." Pei Wenshuan's face turned ashen, sweat pouring down like rain. His lips trembled as he stammered in defense. I was also blinded by grease at the time, when I saw that letter. I was so furious that I lost control of myself and committed this grave mistake. A letter. Pei Yuan coldly interrupted him. Are you talking about this letter? He picked up a letter from the desk that had long turned yellow, showing it to everyone. This is what was called the evidence of guilt back then. I have already invited the best handwriting expert in the entire capital city to authenticate it. The expert said that although the handwriting of this letter mimics my mother's style incredibly well, there are subtle differences in several keystrokes and pauses compared to my mother's actual handwriting. To mimic it so accurately shows that the person who copied it was very familiar with my mother's handwriting. Pei Yuan's gaze, like a sharp sword, pierced toward Liu Rumei. Liu family, you are my mother's maternal cousin, who grew up alongside my mother reading and writing, correct? Liu Rumei trembled all over, her face ashen with fear. Pei Yuan then looked toward Pei Wenshuan, his voice carrying a trace of barely perceptible mockery. Minister Pei, you have been married to my mother for 6 years, slept in the same bed, and see each other every day. Do you really not know the difference between your wife's own handwriting and someone else's imitation? Or perhaps, you don't actually confuse them, but you simply don't want to distinguish between them. This question struck like a heavy hammer, smashing straight into Pei Wenshuan's heart. He suddenly raised his head, meeting Pei Yuan's eyes that saw everything. Yeah, does he really not know the difference? No, he just doesn't want to believe, that's all. Or rather, he just needs an excuse, a reason. To get rid of me, his wife from a military family, with a strong-willed personality who always stands above him in every aspect. My prestigious family background, which was my support when I married him, has become a thorn in his heart. He was a poor scholar who became a top imperial examinee, and married the daughter of a general. Everyone said he had climbed high. On the surface, he was overwhelmed with gratitude, but in his heart, he was filled with inferiority and resentment. The appearance of Liu Rumei gave him a perfect opportunity, an opportunity that could both eliminate me and allow him to marry his gentle and docile cousin who was always submissive to him. So, he chose to believe those shoddy pieces of evidence. He chose, and pushed me into the abyss with his own hands. All of this, Pei Yuan saw through. You're not stupid, you're just evil. Pei Yuan looked at him, word by word, delivering the final verdict. Pei Wenshuan's entire defense crumbled completely at this moment. He collapsed on the ground, sobbing bitterly, like a child who had lost his way. I was wrong, I really was wrong. Qingning, I'm sorry to you. His repentance came far too late. Too late by a full 13 years. I floated in mid-air, coldly watching him. My heart had already died completely in that cold river water back then. 10. The case is now clear. Frame-up, murder, arson, massacre. Each and every one is a capital offense. The final verdict has been delivered. Liu Rumei, as the mastermind, was sentenced to Linkai punishment, to be executed in 3 days. The elderly steward of the Pei family, as an accomplice, was sentenced to immediate beheading. Pei Wenshuan, although not directly involved in the murder, as a husband who listened to slanderous words and wrongfully killed his wife, his crime is unforgivable. The emperor, remembering his former talent as a top scholar, commuted his death sentence to exile for 3,000 li, forbidding him to ever return to court. As for Lady Pei, who had sheltered and indulged him. She was equally guilty, however, considering her advanced age. She was sentenced to lifelong house arrest at the Pei family's ancestral estate, under the supervision of the government. The Pei family was completely ruined. All the family assets were seized. When the tree falls, the monkeys
immediately approved the petition. Not only did he posthumously infect me as a first-rank noble lady, but he also ordered the construction of a magnificent chastity pillar archway in my hometown. At the same time, he issued an edict to remove my remains from the common burial ground and rebury them with the ceremonial rites of a first-rank noble lady, relocating them to the ancestral mausoleum of the Pei family. No, not the Pei family's ancestral mausoleum. The Pei family no longer has an ancestral tomb. Pei Yuan used all his savings to purchase a feng shui paradise on the outskirts of the capital, building a mausoleum for me. He also petitioned the emperor to restore the name and status of my mother's Shen family. From then on, he no longer bore the surname Pei. His name is Shen Yuan. On the day of the grave relocation, he personally accompanied the coffin from the mausoleum in the suburbs of the capital. Dozens of miles of road, he walked the entire journey step by step. He wore heavy mourning clothes, his face pale, his expression solemn. When my coffin was slowly lowered into the tomb, I felt that the force binding me seemed loosening. I was no longer trapped in the Pei residence. I could follow my Yuana and come to his side. I floated behind him, watching as he personally erected a tombstone for me. On the tombstone, there were no superfluous words, only, grave of Lady Qingning Shen, mother of compassion, erected by her unworthy son Yuan. After burying me, he knelt down before my grave and would not get up, from noon until the sun set behind the mountains. The mute old woman nearby was anxious, turning in circles, constantly trying to persuade him, but he remained motionless, as if he were a stone statue. It rained again, just like the day I died, cold, bone-chilling. Rain soaked his clothes, sliding down his emaciated cheeks. I couldn't tell whether it was rain or tears. In these 10 years, I had never seen him cry. No matter how great the suffering and humiliation he endured, he never shed a single tear. But today, in this place that belongs solely to you and me, he finally put down all his disguises and strength. He lay on my gravestone like a child. The pain and longing he had suppressed for over 10 years finally erupted completely at this moment. Mother, his hoarse voice carried endless and sorrow. Son is not filial, making you wait for 10 years. Mother, I miss you so much. These years, I'm so tired. He cried out again and again, like a wounded young beast, licking its own wounds. I reached out my hand, wanting to embrace him, wanting to stroke his head. This time, my hand actually passed through the rain curtain and landed truly on top of his head. He seemed to sense something, and his crying gradually stopped. He slowly raised his head, those bloodshot eyes looking around blankly. Mother, is that you? I exerted all my strength, trying to make him see me, trying to make him hear my voice. Yuana, Mother is here. My voice was very light, like a breeze. But he seemed to have heard it. His eyes suddenly lit up. He looked toward the direction I was in, and a childlike smile appeared on his face, one I had never seen before. Mother, I saw you. I looked at him and smiled too, smiling and smiling. Tears began to fall. It turns out, ghosts also have tears. My body began to become transparent. I know that my time is running short. I told him, Yuana, don't be afraid. Live well, live for yourself, get married, have children, live as an ordinary person, and experience the joys and sorrows of this world. Your mother will be watching over you from heaven. His tears flowed even more violently. He desperately reached out his hand toward me, trying to grab me. Mother, don't go, don't leave me. I looked at him one last time, engraving his current appearance deeply into my heart. Then, my body transformed into specks of starlight, dissipating in the storm and rain. At that moment, I felt an unprecedented sense of relief and liberation. I know. I can finally, peacefully leave, because my Yuana has become strong enough to face this world on his own. The last words I leave him will guide him for the rest of his life. helping him step out of the shadow of hatred and embrace the life that truly belongs to him. Yuana, your mother is leaving. You want to be good. Side story, Shin Yuan's chapter. My name is Shin Yuan. In my memories before I was 5 years old, the world was warm, with her mother's warm embrace, her homemade Osmanthus cakes, and her gentle voice reading books under the lamp every night. She would always say, "My Yuana, you must become a man who stands tall and proud, with a heart for the world and the ability to help all living beings." I didn't understand these great principles back then. I only knew that I loved watching her smile. When she smiled, her eyes were like crescent moons, brighter than the stars in the sky. But in the year I was 5 years old, the heavens collapsed. They said my mother was unfaithful, that she had an affair with another man. They threw her into a pig cage and drowned her in the cold river. I watched with my own eyes as the person I loved most disappeared before my very eyes. At that moment, something inside my heart died with him. From then on, my world was left with only black and white, and endless hatred. Father, the man I once admired and revered, became my most hated enemy. He called me a bastard and whipped me with a horsewhip. The stepmother, that woman with a knife hidden behind a smile, used every method to torment me. They both wanted me to die, but I just couldn't go along with their wishes. I was like a wild grass struggling in a crack between stones, fighting desperately to live, because I knew that if I died, there would be no one left to clear my mother's wrongful conviction. I began secretly reading books, in those darkest nights. It was the words in books that gave me the only light. I told myself to endure until I had enough strength to step on them all. That year I was 15, I left the hellish home. At 18, I won the triple top honors in the imperial examinations and became the youngest Zhuangyuan in history. Everyone thought I had soared to great heights, but only I knew that behind this achievement were countless sleepless nights, tears, and blood I had shed. I entered the imperial court and climbed the ranks step by step. I became cold, ruthless, and merciless, stopping at nothing to achieve my goals. All those who stood in my way became stepping stones for me. They were all afraid of me, calling me a monster without feelings. They don't know that all my emotions were buried together with my mother's death. I have finally become the Grand Minister of the Cabinet, becoming someone who can cover the sky with one hand. I cleared my mother's name and sent all my enemies to hell. At the moment justice was finally served, I felt no joy as I had imagined, only endless emptiness. Standing at the pinnacle of power, I felt like a wandering ghost. Until that day, in front of my mother's grave, I met her again. She was still the same as she was in my memory, so gentle, so beautiful. She said to me, "Yuana, live well." At that moment, my heart that had long been dead seemed to beat again. I finally understand that revenge is not the entirety of my life's meaning. My mother wanted, not a son consumed by hatred. She wanted a son who could live well, who could experience happiness. I have honored my mother's final wish. I began to try and live like a normal person. In my 30th year, I married. It was the emperor who arranged the marriage for me, to the daughter of a general. She had a cheerful, straightforward personality, carefree and unrefined. Like a flame that illuminated my cold world, we treated each other with respect and courtesy, and later, gradually, feelings developed between us. We had a son and a daughter. Our son looked like me, steady and reserved. Our daughter looked like her, lively and adorable. I am no longer the lone. I have a home, have vulnerabilities, and have armor. I am still the Premier Minister who holds power over the court, but I am no longer cold-hearted. I will be angry because my daughter broke my beloved inkstone, and I will also feel relieved because my son made progress in his studies. I will stay with my wife, watching the sunrise and sunset under the crabapple tree in the backyard. That crabapple tree was transplanted from the old mansion of the Pei family. It was planted by my mother with her own hands. Every time I see it, I think of my mother. I will tell my children that they have a very wonderful grandmother. She is gentle and strong, and the best person in the world. I have lived to be 80 years old. My children and grandchildren are numerous, and my students have spread throughout the world. I served 3 emperors and helped establish a golden age. In historical records, I am known as the greatest prime minister in history. On my deathbed, Lying in bed, I saw hallucinations before my eyes. I saw her again. She was still so young, so beautiful, standing in a brilliant glow, reaching out her hand to me. Ioana. It's time to go home, I laughed. Mother, I'm coming. My life has been tumultuous and grand, and I have also fallen into the depths of despair, but I have no regrets, because I know that no matter where I go, there is someone up in heaven, looking at me with gentleness. Mother, thank you. It was you who gave me 2 lives. Once was the body, once was the soul. End of full text.